Now it's official. All right, we've got, just a minute or two past the hour. We've still got some folks trickling in here to join us, and we are so excited to have all of you joining us. I personally am even more excited to have this panel, as I just mentioned, of goats joining us. Very excited to have Liz from the University of Illinois, Risa from the University of Maryland, Amanda from UMass, and Mark, who just marked his 9th year at Syracuse today. Super excited to have y'all joining us. I'm going to go ahead and keep my welcome brief, but I'm excited to talk about the future of student athlete development. The first thing that I would love to have y'all do is just go around and we'll just have a little bit more of the elevator pitch than just name and school that I just gave. So Liz, we'll start with you and then rotate from there.
Thanks, Taylor, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As she mentioned, my name is Liz Reyes. I oversee our Illini Way Student Athlete Development Office here. I have about 14, 15 years of college athletics experience, all on the student athlete support side. Started off on the academic side at the University of Washington, then worked at Baylor University, the University of Arkansas, had a hot cup of tea in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns, and joined Illinois on the student athlete development side here about a year ago, a year and some change. So that's kind of my background and where I've been, but happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. And from there, we'll kick it to Amanda.
Hi, yes. First off, thank you for everyone who's tuning in. I always love to start off with gratitude. Taylor, thank you for asking us to join this and to join this panel full of goats. I'm grateful for that. But again, Amanda Eckeboot, Director of Student Athlete Development, Diversity Inclusion Officer here at UMass. I have about 6 years of higher education experience, where 4 of those years is working in college athletics. And I was a former junior college women's basketball student athlete, attended Arizona State University just for my education, and then continued into Oregon State for my master's, where I definitely fell in love with developing student athletes. And a big part of my why and my purpose that I am so committed is, I don't create student athletes. I help discover and uncover all the great things about them, because it's just a matter of them having confidence in themselves to really own that, so that they can be successful when they graduate. But yes, super excited about this.
I'm going to take a mental note on that. Discover and uncover the student athletes. I like that a lot, Amanda. Thank you. From there, we'll go to Risa.
All right, thank you everyone who showed up and is listening to this great conversation today. Taylor, thank you for having us show up and be in this space. Risa Lovelace, currently serving as the Assistant Athletic Director for Student Athlete Development at the University of Maryland. Former student athlete at a historical Black college named Hampton University. Went on to receive my master's at Old Dominion University. And then the last couple of stops I've had in higher education and college athletics would be George Mason University, then the University of Oregon, and now back here in my hometown of the University of Maryland. I've spent about 12 years in higher education.
Awesome. Thank you, Risa. And last but not least, Mr. Trumbo.
What's up, y'all? Good to be with you all today. Echo what Amanda said. Thanks for letting us be here today and having a discussion around student athlete development and what's popping. But I've been in college athletics for 13 years. And it came similar to Liz, just doing student athlete services. I was on the academic side, then I was in the hybrid role, and now I'm full-time this. So I've kind of eclipsed the whole spectrum when it comes to that side of the house. But excited to be here. I guess most notably known for building the program here at Syracuse, the S Project program here, which has been a joy for me to be from the onset and also just continue the growth that it's been having. Dabbing into the teaching game. We launched a class this year. Dope. As we continue, and that'll be probably part of our discussion today. We're evolving our services and how we're interacting with student athletes, and excited to be a part of this panel and talk to you all. I guess if you need more information, just check out LinkedIn. I don't really like talking about myself, so let's just get to it.
Awesome. Thank y'all for providing those little more detailed elevator pitches and just a little bit more on your background. as everybody can hear, we've got, all kinds of different backgrounds who have all kind of led to the same space in student athlete development, different experiences from student athlete all the way to where they are today. So we're thrilled to have them and their insight, their knowledge, all those great things joining us for this discussion on the future of student athlete development, where we've been, where are we going, what's it going to look like in the future. So the first question that I really want to kick off with is, you can't get to the future without thinking of and talking about the past, right? So the first thing that I want to do is just kind of talk about, how did we get here? So when did you first become aware of student athlete development, and kind of talk about what it looked like at that time, maybe the evolution from your perspective of where we've been as a field and where we're headed next, or where we are today rather. And I'll just open it up. Whoever wants to jump in on that first, feel free.
All right, I'll jump in. So for me, I don't think I knew about student athlete development until a mentor of mine said, come take this job and do this work. Very honestly, right? Like, I went to a historically Black university where we only had one academic advisor. So to understand additional resources, that wasn't something that we were equipped with as student athletes. And I just had great mentors in my life who understood that, like, I could come in and have a positive change on student athletes after the experience that I had. And so it really kind of hit me maybe in 2010 when this position at George Mason was created to look at, for us at that time, it was still life skills, really looking at community engagement and career readiness, or back then we called it career development. So that was kind of like my introduction into student athlete development, a department of one person serving almost 600 student athletes. And so I was always questioning, the why and how am I supposed to help 600 students as one person? So for me, like, when I think about how I became aware and kind of where we started, and some of us still have shops of one person, right? And so how do we continue to think and evolve to get folks globally to understand that this is more than one person's job, that this is actually all of our jobs to be doing.
I love that, Risa. Thank you for sharing. And again, we'll keep it open to the rest of y'all.
Yes, Risa, to not just one person, a power of one over here. So I definitely understand that. For me, in terms of my experience, I like to say that it may be a little late in the game compared to others, but I wasn't aware about student athlete development until graduate school at Oregon State, which was only about 4 years ago, which now looking back and with COVID and everything, it feels like 10 plus years. But pretty much with me, I was offered a graduate assistantship working with Beyond Football at Oregon State. So it was student athlete development specifically for football. The two things that I knew was I had the opportunity to help develop student athletes, but also get my master's program paid for. And it wasn't until I actually, had the experience where I was like, wow, I am helping student athletes with their development while also helping my own development in my journey. So it felt like we were going through the journey and the process together. And at the same time, it was looking back, I was able to then transition to all sports and kind of looking at how things were back then, considering it was only 4 years ago. It's still kind of the same. I'm grateful for the experience that I got at Oregon State, really thinking about empowering, engaging, and equipping our student athletes around everything that Risa just mentioned around professional development, career readiness, personal development, and leadership. So really helping student athletes in all of those aspects and the different student athlete affinity groups, student athlete led groups to support student athletes from diverse backgrounds. So not too much of a difference of how I feel things are now. I think things have just been elevated more, and there has been some definite shifts, which I know we can touch on a little bit later, but student athlete development is for sure growing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amanda.
I can jump in next. My awareness of student athlete development happened early in my career, but I was working on the academic side. You all may have heard of an organization called N4A. Shout out to N4A. And I was joined that, and I was told by my mentors that I needed to network and kind of understand the different parts of the house, if you will. On my undergraduate experience, I was working in the tutoring office. I was working in a little bit academic advising and outreach, but student athlete development wasn't one that I was very involved in. So with N4A, I had my academic role, but I decided that I wanted to learn a little bit about student athlete development. And that was early on. And about midway through, I was doing football academics, and my conversations involved a lot of the conversations that student athlete development professionals are having, talking about every part of life and how it's affecting their academic performance, talking about their future and what they're going to be doing. And I kind of got nudged by some of my mentors. They're like, you know, a lot of this overlaps with student athlete development. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I need to learn a little bit more. Long story short, I crossed over student athlete development while I was at Arkansas. And I wanted to challenge myself and see what it would possibly look like at the next level. So I dived into the NFL for a year and was doing community and alumni relations there. But it was just interesting to kind of see how different organizations support athletes, you know, at different levels with different intent as well. But I also kind of kept in my mind that I'd like to advance in administration. So how can I make myself stand out? By acquiring new skills, new experiences, expanding my network. But again, all that to say that it's always good to learn. I think that's why we're all here, to learn from each other. And the more you can diversify your background, the more, you know, you can connect with people. I know everyone on the screen, they all have a wealth of knowledge. So I really encourage everyone to reach out and connect. But that's kind of how I stumbled across it.
Thank you, Liz.
I don't know many professionals who have graduated college and said, I'm going to student athlete development. Like, I just don't meet these people. If you're one of those, like, feel free to just shout yourself out. I've never met you. I'd love to meet you. It's kind of like it's happened. And I think that's the nature of the business and why there's such incredible people who work here, is we are very much see a need, fill a need type people that we're just going to jump in and figure it out. And that's most of the time how we do our work. You don't get a plethora of time to prepare. We don't get time to gain skills or knowledge. It's just like, you get an email one day, it's like, hey, Mark, can you do this? And it has to happen next month. And you just figure it out. So for me, I went to an N4A regional conference in East Lansing, and I met Jeremy Flynn, and he toured me around the facility, and he's like, oh, this is our person who handles career development. I'm like, what's that? Like, guys, you have one person who just does career development? Yeah, that's what they do. And so that piqued my interest, and then launched a program at Ball State because we didn't have anything there for leadership and career. And that's where like the seed was planted, and it just, like, the harvest grew to a point where like I couldn't keep up with it, just doing this work on the side while being an academic advisor. Like, it just, like, the garden was overflowing, right? And I just couldn't keep up with it. And so that's where you have the scary conversation, but necessary conversation, possibly with your supervisor, say like, listen, I need a change. This is why it needs to happen. And this is where I can elevate myself and the value to the student athlete. So I think it wasn't from a place of, hey, this is what I need because I need this. It was, hey, I see a need. The athletes are valuing this. I think I can help in that space. Let's give it a shot. And I think that's how I was able to get that pitch to work out. And at least at Syracuse, it's just, there's value there. Now you had to prove it. You couldn't just say, hey, I want to do this. Let's make that job description happen. Let's just go. Like, I had to A, do the work, B, apply, go up against other people. And so it was stressful, but at the end of the day, it helped me as a professional. And it really just established, my purpose and value and what I want to bring, at least in the college athletic space. And, it's been a fun ride since.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. We've got a couple of unicorns in the chat right now who were interested in student athlete development straight out of college. Just so you know, you might know them, you might not yet, but they're there. That was a great actually transition for what we're going to jump into next. So I want to talk now about how your educational backgrounds, your professional experiences, how have they influenced the way that you think about student athlete development today? I know a lot of times we see, just like you said, Mark, folks who are in the field who either came from being a student athlete and kind of fell into it. And very rarely, I know there are a few folks out there, but rarely do we see somebody who's coming from, a student affairs background or an education background who's coming into the space. So talk to me a little bit, and Liz, we'll start with you on this one. Talk to me a little bit about your education and your professional experiences and how those have directly impacted or influenced how you think about student athlete development today.
Yeah, I would say my education has highly influenced how I perform every day. It's funny you asked the question. I just talked to my advisor. I'm in a PhD program. I know many of you are in them or you've made it to the other side and you've earned that terminal degree. Major shout out to you all. Congratulations. I think that's like completely been a positive in my career. I was talking to my advisor today and we were kind of reflecting, reminiscing on when I first started the program, and like I was an okay writer, but being in a program like that, it really presses you to sharpen your writing, to be concise, to be direct, and it kind of gives you a confidence boost too. You know, you've been doing this repeatedly so many times. I'm going to make sure that when I message my executive, you know, an executive team, or when I'm messaging across the department of coaches, same application, I'm going to be concise, direct. I want it to be crystal clear. So those kind of transferable skills definitely do exist when you have the opportunity to dive into a terminal degree in a PhD program. That's completely influenced my work and how I operate. I would also say my experience in pro sports also kind of puts me in position sometimes where I look at things differently from a business standpoint, or from a point where we could try to enhance our brand. So for example, a couple of us on our D&I committee here are talking about Hispanic Heritage Month. And I come into a meeting with like all of these ideas, and some of them are great, some of them were far-fetched, but at least I threw everything, you know, on the board, and then we could scale back, pick like what we are able to afford, what we're not able to afford, what's gonna resonate the most with our community. But I think that I give credit to my experience with pro sports, because in that kind of setting, the sky's the limit. You have the money, you have the staffing, it's a business industry. So sky's the limit as to what you can design. So I take that same mindset and I apply it in my current role. Sky's the limit is the first mindset that I have, and then we can peel back and scale back on what we want it to look like at the end. But definitely sparked my creativity and kind of business mind as well.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you, Liz, for sharing. And I'll open it up maybe to one more, and we'll jump to the next question from here.
I see Amanda looking. I was like, she go push button. I'll make this quick because Liz touched on a few things that had me thinking. So I'm not in a PhD program, not in a terminal degree, but I think part of what we do is a lot of research, right? So I think ends up propelling a lot of folks in student athlete development to seek that terminal degree, because we're looking at what the research says and sometimes trying to see if that actually works in practice. Right. And so I think for me, that has been something that I've centered the work that I do. And then when you ask the question about just like education background, I mean, I have a double degree, I like to say, in sports management, but I also had an opportunity to work with a professor who oversaw an intern program. We have an intern program here that we facilitate within our space. So being able to bring that knowledge and experience here, but then also that resources part, right? So, you know, Liz had her, what she say, a cup of tea in the NFL, where the sky is the limit and they have all these resources. Most of us, even at Power 5 institutions, still don't have all the resources that we potentially want. So I think about the experiences I had as a student at a HBCU where, again, the funds are very limited, but we were still able to accomplish so much. And so I think about how do I, you know, walk into these doors every day and try to still have that mindset, even though I'm able to do a little bit more and still meet all of the needs that our students have.
Thank you, Risa, for sharing that. Again, another great segue here. We're going to jump in, and Mark and Amanda, I'll have you answer this one. So kind of a twofold, but what would you say are the pillars of student athlete development? And you can make it specific to the institutions that you serve at. If you're in a space where there's something else that you're thinking about adding that's not quite there yet, feel free to share that as well. So what are the pillars? And then is there one pillar that you would say is maybe more important than all the rest?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I feel that the pillars should be consistent across the board. Of course, it depends on the institution and the needs of the student athletes, but I like to say that even I've carried from Oregon State is PPC. You know, you have the personal development, and under that is the leadership development, is the DEI aspect, really developing individuals so that they can work with groups from other backgrounds, all different walks of life, and then the professional development. You know, Risa mentioned it, Liz and Mark, just in terms of career readiness, you know, mock interviews, resumes, networking, placement is so important. And then community service. It's really that exploratory stage and really getting our student athletes to be involved outside of athletics. But obviously community service can be anything from other internship opportunities and conferences, just development in that sense. But that's kind of my pillars that I would say for student athlete development. When it comes to, is there one more important than the other? And I agree, Rachel, that is a tough question, because it's almost like saying that one identity is more important than the other. When we're thinking about holistic development for our student athletes, you need to nourish all parts of that. And I feel that for me personally, I don't know if there's one more important than the other, but I'm open to having dialogue with the rest of the panelists about that. But that's my opinion in terms of that.
That's a great answer. I think Amanda hit a lot of those right on the head. And that's where your institutional knowledge and climate makes a difference in terms of what you're going to focus on. And I mean, like many other fields, and you could get this into student athlete development, you can get very hyper concerned about what your competitors are doing, what your like institutions are doing, what your peers are doing, what your colleagues are doing. And it's just like, well, we're not doing that. You're not doing that. And it's just, it gets very frustrating, because maybe those people who are seeing, the grass is greener aren't the people doing the work. And they just say, hey, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't you doing this? Why? And so it gets, sometimes it's just miscommunication about like, what is our driver? Like, what is the mission of our institution? And is our student athlete development program aligned to that? Is it aligned to the mission of our athletics department? If your athletics department has a strategic plan, are you woven within it? Or are we just, so that's where I think you just have to take a really deep dive in terms of your own institutional knowledge. We can pretty much similarly come up with the pillars that are important to us, and what Amanda came up with in terms of personal, professional, civic engagement. If this panel was 2 years ago, 24 months ago, how much DEI work are we talking about? Really, how much are we really talking about? It's probably not a pillar. It's something that we might be talking about. It's not a pillar.
Mark, I'm gonna say, I also think that depends on who the person is too, right?
Yeah.
The DEI perspective. I think if you are a person of color or multiple identities, you probably were having that conversation more than 2 years ago. But again, when we look around the room, how many of us are there that have multiple identities that aren't centered in whiteness? And so I think that's also a conversation in student athlete development and academics, honestly, we should be having.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. And I think it's something that, given what's happened in the last 18 to 24 months, it's at a larger scale, and a lot of more institutions are engaged. But to Riza's point, like, how healthy has that engagement been? That's a big concern for me. Is we talk about checking the box, we talk about bringing in speakers, we talk about these things, but or we're having conversations around race or identity, inclusivity, equity. It's like, is it healthy discourse, or is it things that, well, I feel like we should be talking about, but I don't know who's leading those conversations, who's leading those trainings. We're giving these designations to people on different staffs and saying, hey, we need you to lead this. Are they equipped to lead this? Did they ask to have that designation? Like, there's so many pieces to that. And then it gets woven into student athlete development, because let's just be honest, like, this is why I like these panels, because we do real talk. I don't care if it's recorded and you hear me. The idea is like student athlete development become, I would call it like a dumping ground. Hey, is that your job? Is that your job? Is that your job? Okay, let's just throw it to student athlete development, figure it out. Right. And that's where I get my frustrations is, hey, I want to be involved. I want to help out, but I don't want to get involved or lead something that I'm not prepared or ready to handle. So when you, going back to the original question with pillars, have pillars, but also understand, what are you ready to lead? What are the ones that you want to develop? And what are the ones where you just need to have a real conversation with people around you to say, hey, we're all saying leadership development's important, but if you're not ready to lead that work, then what does that look like for us moving forward? So sometimes it's just establishing a plan to get to that pillar, and not just saying, let's just do it with no kind of strategic plan in place.
You're getting all the snaps and all the chats for this one, Mark. And I think you bring up a really interesting point in everything that you just said. And it's a great opportunity to really talk about designation versus job role and job responsibilities. So designations, I think more often than not, is just that tack on, the catch-all, as I think Liz said in in the chat. So being aware of that is definitely something to, be cognizant of as student athlete development professionals. And with that being said, obviously there have been some major market drivers, shifts, influences, within kind of overall, not just within athletics, but within the overall, culture of the nation that we live in and the world and beyond. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the biggest shifts, market drivers, events that have influenced the field of student athlete development, and share a little bit about how you've handled those shifts and those changes on your campuses. And we will let's go Amanda to start this one, and then we'll open it up from there.
Yes, I feel like this panel could be around DEI in itself. Mark was just dropping gems, mic drops, everything. So just in terms of that, obviously DEI and amidst the, the racial injustices that were happening over the summer, you see this transition of a hot topic of DEI, just being hot topic, popular. And in addition to that, it's mental health. I feel that even now with our student athletes, it's not only COVID, it's racial injustices, it's not having the connection and community that I know that our student athletes right now are absolutely craving. So knowing that piece and knowing that we're back on campus, back in full swing of things, really being able to provide those support services, those dialogical spaces so that they can create community with each other, because I know that has been a huge thing for our student athletes. They've been really wanting that connection and that piece. And I feel that that's one way that I've been able to help try and provide those spaces for our student athletes here. Another thing is NIL, name, image, and likeness. Whew, that is a transition in itself that I feel we're all constantly trying to educate ourselves on. But now our student athletes are, I like to say is education is protection, making sure that our student athletes are being educated, because now they are going to be, seeked out to, whether it's alumni, employers, whatever the case may be, about, what is it that they can do with their NIL, and being able to profit off of it, and making sure that they're best equipped to make the best decision, because, our student athletes sometimes don't read the email. So we want to make sure that they will read the contract if that does present itself. But those are some of the shifts that I've noticed, that I've hoped I've been able to try to, support student athletes in those shifts.
I'll jump in with, I think donor relations has also changed student athlete development. Obviously I was able to get a gift for over $20 million to be able to do the work that we do here. But I think we've also seen other institutions realize that student athlete development is a space that donors want to be a part of, that they're willing to stop putting money into facilities and putting money into the actual student and their well-being holistically outside of their sport and academics. So I think that's a huge game changer that we weren't talking about 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I'm excited that donors are changing the narrative, even in their space, to say, it's great that we got all these fancy buildings, but how is this fancy building going to help that student 5 years from now? It's great that you want to put my name up on the training room, but how is that going to help the student athlete 5 years from now? Instead, they're investing in getting humans like us sitting around this panel today, and the folks that have joined this conversation, giving us the ability to hire bigger staffs, giving us the ability to take students out into the market and explore some of these careers that they may be interested in. So that's something that I think we don't talk enough about in the student athlete development space that we really need to be talking about.
I don't have anything groundbreaking to add on to what Amanda and Risa just shared, but to the point that was just made, when you're able to clearly illustrate the work that you're doing with your, are you tracking, are you assessing, are you evaluating the programs that you're providing the support, that's easier to package and to sell to a donor than someone who's coming in and you're just kind of talking to them, but you have no deliverables. So with each program and each opportunity, I take it seriously, because I'm like, this could be the moment where student athletes share something that's, could be something that's heartfelt, something that we could all relate to, and maybe be a potential testimonial if it's safe and they're willing and they feel comfortable with it. Or maybe this is a student athlete that can really resonate with the donor that's interested in similar backgrounds, similar stories. Is this the shot that we want to take and capture for our program, because every student athlete's engaged and dialed in, or they're listening, or they're kind of taking notes and they're attentive during that session. So not to drag it on, but I think every opportunity is important so that you can document, assess, evaluate, package, and be able to sell it for more future bills, if you will, from donors.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Mark, do you have anything to add?
And they crushed that. I really don't have much to add on top of that. The only other area that came to mind for me that I've tried to be more available, especially for our coaches, is at least for me, I'm a big culture champion. Like I believe in healthy organizations can lead to productivity and performance. And as the new generations of athletes keep coming in, like that ability to connect and create engagement has been a little harder with each class has come in. So I'm trying to be, a resource and advocate for our coaches to be like, hey, if you need just team dynamics, team culture, team bonding, team chemistry, like captains and leadership development, like a lot of us might have leadership academies or captains training, stuff like that, but maybe they're specifically within their mini ecosystem that's not being hit on your larger scale programming, that you can come in and really be a resource add. And it's not that we always have to be the person or the office that handles it. Sometimes we're just a conduit. And that can be a great spot for us too. It's just getting them connected to people who can really assist with what they're going through. So that would be one thing if I had a word of encouragement for the other 64 people on the call is don't feel like you have to be the expert of everything, that you have to have the answers, that you have to be the person to help. It feels good. It feels good when you're the person who can, but at the same time, ultimately you're there to help solve the issue, solve the problem, like create the most effective and efficient way to get things done. And sometimes that's outside of your house, and that's cool too. But great answers from everybody else.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark, and really goes back to what Liz was touching on as well in terms of selling and packaging your work. If the rest of the department knows what you're doing in student athlete development, that is the avenue to donors. That is the avenue to connecting a student athlete with the marketing department to help with NIL, to all these different things. So, utilize your resources. We tell our student athletes that all the time, right? As professionals, it's the exact same thing. Utilize those resources on campus, and be loud and be confident in what you're doing and what your department has to offer. Love those answers. So moving forward, we've been talking about kind of the past, the present, the market drivers, all those things. So of course the next space we're going is the future. So I would love to hear from every single one of you, where are we going as a field, and what does that look like maybe 5 years down the road? Or just generally, if we don't want to put a timestamp on it.
I will take a small crack at this. I think it's interesting. We talked about NIL, and we already addressed that being a big area that a lot of us are working in. And it seems like we're working with walking young businessmen and women, and that's important for us to acknowledge and realize as we're providing support. Are we providing, I think Amanda said it best, education is protection. So are we protecting them and supporting them with the resources and education that they need to be able to make those business decisions? It's interesting to kind of hear about some different states, depending on your legislation. Some states are able to play matchmaker, if you will, give them like business information, businesses that may potentially want to interact and engage with student athletes. And some are on the other extreme, not as engaged. So I think we need to kind of know where we fall within our department and within our state, what's allowable, what's not allowable. But that's super important. I don't know that I would be able to make grandiose business decisions like that when I was a college student, and for those high profile sports too, and other Olympic sports too, where there's a lot of folks that want to do business deals. How are we, I think we got to think, how are we helping student athletes so whenever a deal pops up, they have a routine cyclical questions that they are addressing and kind of asking themselves and asking the people that want to do business with them. So I think the future of NIL will continue to evolve. Nobody will be the expert in NIL. Like, I can guarantee you that. I've hopped on these calls and I'm like, what are y'all doing? What are we doing? Reese is laughing as we were on a call last week. And I'm like, okay. So we're kind of in this together. No one is an expert in NIL, so we can all like rest assured in that. So yeah, that's something that I think I wanted to resurface back up.
5 years from now or in the future, I would like to see that, we focus a lot more on career readiness for our student athletes. I mean, I think that's a huge part of what we do here in Maryland. Really at every level, now that I was able to hire another colleague who will be doing some career readiness for our sophomores, who we all deem probably the lost class because they get transitioned in and then we forget about them that sophomore year, and then junior and senior year, there's now this extra emphasis. So for me, I would like to see all of our students career ready to the level that they need to be, right? Like, I don't want there to be this metric that says every student athlete, once they graduate, has to have a job or has to be in an internship. Like, we recognize that they all have different meanings and values of what they want to do post-graduation. But also there should be some level of career readiness, even if you go into professional sports, that I know that you can go do that interview and do that interview well. I know that you have a resume that's more than just, I played a sport for 4 or 5 years. So for me, I think that's a piece I would love to see us continue to dive in and grow. And Tim Bryson will like this shout out, but I also think like we're not doing a good job of how we onboard and really lift our international students. And I know y'all have all probably seen the multiple conversations on social media lately about international students can't participate in NIL. So now they're even a further step behind because they're not on the same playing field. But even how do we talk about what they major in changes how they can either stay here in the States or go back home. So I think those are pieces that we need to really start to hammer down and really think about how do we create student athlete development to be for all students and not just American students.
I'll go next. I'm not really sure what the 5 years brings, but something that I would like to see is that, if there's one thing that we've learned is so much from this pandemic. And for us being remote, I feel that we're in such this, speed and process to get back to normal, whatever that might mean. And I feel that, maybe normalcy back then isn't what it should be now. I feel if there's one thing, really still utilizing this hybrid aspect, really making sure that we're still offering, career opportunities, internship, networking opportunities for employers and alums who are in different states, different time zones. I know that that's been super helpful for us, and just really continuing that. And also, again, just really honing in on the mental health part. I feel that mental health has definitely been highlighted and been brought to, the forefront, and just really continuing that in our work for sure. And this might be a little cheat way to say, but I feel that Game Plan is going to continue having great assessments and modules. So I'm sure they're going to come out with a lot of great stuff that can help support us. So still utilizing that.
We appreciate the plug, Amanda.
Love the plug.
Mark, what do you got?
Extra resources that UMass coming. So I think it's, gosh, I'll tell you a couple of things. One would be the advancement of experiential learning has to be part of the process. Like, if we could get rid of workshops entirely, I'd be a happy person. The more experiential learning we can do, because I think about what their life looks like after Syracuse or after your university. They're not getting a lot of workshops at work. It's learning on the job. So if we can create, I like to call it controlled chaos. Like, if you can kind of create that experience for them, whether it be through the career, the leadership, whatever, is we teach a lot of aspects in controlled environments, but that's not how they're applied. Like, you teaching athletes how to be great leaders, how to be prepared for the moment when they're actually in the moment, it feels way different. And so they don't know how to respond. So I think experiential learning over the next 5 years, I'd like to see an advancement of that, which will require multiple things, which you would imagine what those are. I also think, and this isn't probably a 5-year, maybe a 10-year goal, but I think at some point I would love student athlete development become the next academic support model. Meaning there's a reason you need 7, 8, 9 academic advisors, you need 5 or 6 compliance people, you need 15 different sports medicine people, because like there's too many bodies, right? And you need that specialized attention because it's very the nature of the work is so different between teams, between coaches, all these different things. So I would love for the realization from the C-suite level down to understand that if we want to be at a, let's call it a competitive advantage when it comes to student athlete development, it's going to take a workforce similar to academics to do that work. Like, I mean, if we all sat back and feel like if we had caseloads similar to academics where I had like 2 or 3 sports, like imagine the relationships you build, the level of like just knowledge that you can have. It's hard, like Amanda said, like 1 verse 600, Riza said 1 verse 600, like that model is just not going to be successful. It can't, not to the level that we know needs to be. So that would be in my 5-year, 10-year way to future-proof our industry, is understanding that, and this isn't like a way for say we need more money or we need more staff because I'm overworked. It's just the idea of like, that's what the student athletes need. And it's an investment on their part, right? It is an investment. Maybe there isn't a huge bottom line significant advantage for the athletics department, but to the student athlete, it's a huge ROI. It's huge. So it all goes back to like, what's the model of your institution? Like, where do you fall on the spectrum of student-centered and business-centered? Like, where are you at? And then for those of you who are in like career management mode and you're looking for other opportunities, you're thinking what's next, pay attention to that. Who is the leadership at your institutions? Do they align with what you think? Because the last thing you want to do is come in with this huge student-centered model to a business-minded approach, and it's just, you're knuckling right off the bat. So that's all I got.
I think the underlying theme in all those answers was adaptability, right? The ability to adapt to what the student athletes need, what the field needs, what your institution needs, all great things. So what I want to do is wrap up. I've got just one more question really to ask y'all. And then what I want to do is open it up to questions that any of our guests may have. So I know we've got one that's in the Q&A, but if you do have questions that the panel of goats have not answered yet in just their answers that we've been rolling through, please feel free to drop that in the Q&A section, and we'll be sure to get that answered here in just a couple of minutes. But the last question that I want to ask is, so keeping the future in mind and really everything that we just talked about in the last question, what are some of the best practices when it comes to developing curriculum for student athlete development programming? We hear that, I feel like, all the time. It's been kind of a buzz lately, but what are best practices when you're sitting down with your teams or with yourself or maybe some colleagues and brainstorming? If you are a team of one, how do you develop curriculum? Where do you begin? How does that work?
So I'm gonna go back to something Mark just mentioned, and I think I'm not answering the programming piece of this. I think it starts with the humans, right? The humans that are sitting at the table within the department. The more diverse of thought you can have at that table, I think the better our programming becomes. And I would like to say I'm proud of the people that sit around my table, because we're all coming from different places, different backgrounds, and it's so refreshing to kind of see what they want to do. But I also think that's on us as supervisors to let them run with their ideas. I think originally when I got into this business, it was like, no, we're not going to do that because them over there, they're not doing that. So why do we need to think out of the box, right? When we got into, at least when I got into this business, let's not use social media. The students need to be focused, right? Like, so I think we as supervisors need to allow our staffs to be creative and see what works, right? Some things are going to succeed and some things are going to fail. But I think it's about who we have centered in our spaces. And the second thing, to answer the programming piece of it, again, I think it goes back to some things we've already said, is how are we engaging the students in the process of what we're building? So when we first got here building a program from scratch, we did multiple focus groups with students and coaches to say, what do y'all want to see? What was successful in the past? What didn't work in the past that needs to change? And so I think we have to engage the people who are our audience in order to know what programming needs to be built in this space.
I love it. I don't see anybody unmuting. So, and I can imagine, right, there we go. There we go, Mark.
So, I mean, wild thought, Riza, to actually ask athletes what they're interested in, and how dare you not know what they need. So I think that's a fantastic way to go about it. I mean, when we launched the YES project here at Syracuse, it was a 1-year process from start to finish, with focus groups, with pilot programs. Like, like, it was not one of those things like, hey, let's do it and go, and then not try to like go off the course. Like, we've talked, and I'm sure everybody on this call has done this at some point, right? Be stubborn with your mission, be flexible with the plan. Like, we all know where we want to go, but understand that you might have to veer off your original path in order to get there. And sometimes it's a healthy thing to veer off that path. It's willing, to me, I think it screams so much greatness to the athletes to show, like, when we adapt and we're changing and we're trying, like, it shows them like, listen, we're not stubborn. We're trying to better ourselves. We're trying to make things better for you. We're consistently going back to the board. Like, it's okay to take what you're doing and feel like there's a better way to do it and do it. Like, go for it, right? I can't tell me how many times I've had workshops with 0 people. I can't tell me how many times I've gotten feedback that was more, Likert scale 1 to 5, and it comes back at 2.2. Like, and it's just like, how could they not love it? How can they, because it sucked. Like, I don't know what else. And that's where you all as professionals need to understand, like, was it content or delivery? Because sometimes it's one or the other, and we mistake that. Sometimes the content is super, but the person delivering it did not do a great job. Sometimes it's the vice versa. That's usually my issue with campus. The other issue could be is like, very engaging speaker, awesome with the discourse, but that the athletes walk away like, hey, what'd you learn? I don't know, that guy was great though, or that woman was awesome. Like, there's got to be more meat to that. So I think as you assess your programs, like, understand, like, where are the like, what's working well. One, good friend of mine, right, Lamar Pottinger, talks about culture renovation. Like, I love the word renovation. What's working, what needs to change, what needs blown up, right? So I think understanding that if something does not go well, it doesn't mean like everything has to go. Maybe there's pieces that work really well. There's other pieces that need some new paint. And then there's other pieces that just have to go. Like, just get it out. But just be humble enough and not just say like, hey, like, everything I touch is gold, right? Just be humble enough to just say, listen, it didn't work. But ultimately we're trying to get this right. And be honest and real with the athletes. I've had some really incredible conversations with athletes after a very shitty program. Just because they start telling me what they didn't like, and that is awesome feedback. Like, what could we have done differently? They're usually really quick to criticize. They don't maybe not give a lot of great feedback, but if something didn't go well, they'll tell you about it. Use it, right? And I think that's super helpful as you develop your curriculum, is get multiple perspectives involved, like Riza said, coaches, athletes, people who are around them, trainers, strength coaches, because they're the ones that are hearing the water cooler talk. They can give you some really cool information too.
I love it. All great things. So let's go. I think, Liz, Amanda, y'all can probably agree that Risa and Mark just killed that answer. But we'll go ahead and, just for the sake of time, jump into the questions. We've got a slew coming in both in the chat and the Q&A section. So the first one, and I'll open it up to anybody, is Mark and Risa's piece about DEI was great. There are conversations being had, especially by marginalized groups, allies, and folks not overseeing departments. How have you all found success presenting ideas to your bosses, be they classes, leadership programs, or affinity groups before 2020? Research and potential impact is a given, but are there other keys?
I think tying in, I always try to keep this group in mind, coaches and what their preferences are, or what they see their student athletes need, or it may be program specific for their team, or they may be more broadly, but tapping into coaches and kind of putting your coach's hat and saying, this is important because they mentioned the research backs it up, it's going to be impactful, and also this could benefit coaches or the program in this way. So whenever you can keep your coach's hat on, I think that's super beneficial. Again, whether that be for deliverables, for recruiting pitches, and let's be honest, when recruits are here, the potential student athletes are not even listening to us. The parents are. But the parents, they have big weight. They have a lot of influence on where their son or daughter are going to attend college. So I don't know. I just kind of think that's an important group that we need to tap into, because they have a lot of pull. If the coaches have buy-in, they're going to back you up. So I think that's something that I try to keep in mind when I'm talking to my oversight about how we need this XYZ and how it's going to be a value add.
I love that. Thank you, Liz. Anybody else on that? We feel good about it. I love it. All right, so next question is, in your opinion, how large does a student athlete development staff need to be in order to be successful?
One more than you think. Go ahead.
It's
Rachel.
funny because I saw that question in the chat and I was like, let me write this down. Let me think about this as we're continuing this conversation. I mean, to be honest, right now, what I have calculated is 13, right? Like I'm thinking about, we do a lot of work and I don't think people realize how much we do. There needs to be somebody that's potentially on our staff looking at employer relations and engagement. There could be another set of people that are doing career advising that have nothing to do with the employer side. You could talk about somebody that's strictly building programs around all of what we do. You can have somebody looking at transitioning in and transitioning out program, whether that's leading a class or something of the sort. And then even some of us do oversee community engagement. So like right there, you could have 2 or 3 people dedicated to all of those areas, and I'm probably missing a few. So yeah, I mean, I think these staffs could be large. I think it's all dependent upon too, who's overseeing these units and how you make all of those things work. And some of us, I know, at least in the Big Ten, some of these folks also have alumni engagement under student athlete development. So that's even an angle we haven't discussed or addressed today that I think also sometimes is looped into the work that we do. So that was my little bit of math that I was doing while I was sitting here.
I like it. I like it. It's important, Matt. This next one, so we've got time for a couple more, 2 or 3 more. And this one I'm asking because I am also interested in the answer. Do you feel that student athlete development is being phased out? Why or why not?
Okay, I'm gonna make this short. Go ahead, Mark.
No, you got a short response. Go.
My short response is I think people are trying to because of NIL, but I refuse to let NIL take us over.
I think the question is, that's a loaded question, by the way. But I think it really depends on, a big part of that depends on what is the lens that your administration sees student athlete development as. Like when NIL came out, like, let's be honest, like some of them on a real, like saw student athlete development as like a clear influencer and an impact, and they tapped into them right away. And some had no idea they could be looking into student athlete development. Like, for example, if NIL, a lot of the state legislation has financial education attached to it, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, whatever. And then you got administrations that didn't even know you all were doing financial literacy with your student athletes, like already. And so it just takes a slight repackage to really turn that into what ultimately you were looking for. So the lens and how they saw you, but sometimes like with NIL, when that comes out, it could be a great time to revisit like your strategic plan, your entire office, like what you're doing. And can you get a chance to communicate that to your AD or your senior staff and just say, hey, here's where we currently are. Here's basically our game plan with student athletes. If you feel like this needs to move or adjust or pivot, like, let's talk about it, right? If you feel like we got clear gaps, one of the best pieces of advice I got was from Kimya Massey out there at Oregon State when NIL came out, is like, as soon as that comes out, go to your AD and just say, hey, I want to be a person who helps you with this. I don't know what that looks like. I don't even know if your AD knows what that looks like, but you can just say, hey, something comes across your desk, it's an email, maybe it's an influencer person, it's a team Altius, maybe you're just getting hit with all kinds of platforms and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. And your compliance staff is like, I'm completely overworked. Send it to me. I'd love to look into it for you, right? So sometimes just making sure that they know that you want to be someone who's involved in the evolution of the student athlete experience, and you're not interested in just doing what we do. Like, you're open to ideas, you're open to changing things, but sometimes over time, like you can imagine, we lose sight of what everybody else is doing around us. And it's easy to do if you're not engaged with it day to day. But this could be a good time to just revisit it and just say, hey, here's where we're at. Maybe we should have a conversation about the direction we're going with all the newness and market drivers that are happening. Maybe we should reassess kind of what our overall direction is as a unit in a program.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Mark. I think it's building that relationship with the AD, really thinking about what are the main focuses of my role, where is it the buckets that I can fill and help out in that aspect. So really being able to be present, being comfortable to have that conversation with your AD. I'm grateful here that I do have support from my AD and my supervisor. I know in some instances, some places might not have the best, relationship and would like to strengthen it. So really figure out how is it that you two can strengthen it. I mean, it's a two-way street for sure, but if we want to be able to build that and show our value and our worth, take that initiative to build that relationship.
Absolutely. Thank y'all for sharing on that one. I think we've got time for maybe one more here. And so I've a couple different people have asked this just slightly different ways, but let's say if you could give advice to anyone who is new entering student athlete development space, what would it be? Or somebody who's just getting started? Either way, if you have advice for new practitioners in the field, what does that look like?
I'll jump in here. I will say, take your job seriously and do it at a high level, and that entails doing everything with high quality. If your assignment is to print off 20 worksheets for tonight's program, like excel at that. Don't just throw them on desks. Like, are they sitting neatly at the desks or the chairs where you're going to have your student athletes sitting? If it's a packet, like I'm getting into the weeds of it, but whatever simple tasks that you've been given, or grandiose, a very complex task that it could be, excel at whatever is given to you. Do it at high quality, double check your work, make sure that it looks right, ask for feedback. I think that's what sets programs apart. And this is not groundbreaking, it's in the details on how you do your work and the quality of level that you do it at. Once people see your work and how what your output is and the quality that's always going to be associated with it, it's just like we tell our student athletes, with everything you are either building or taking away from your brand. So day in and day out, when you do those simple tasks, whether things are pressing and things go the wrong way, something just got dropped on you because we're the catch-all, is the quality of work still there with the tasks you were assigned before that and the new ones that have been assigned as well. I think that's, in a nutshell, in simple ways, kind of what's helped me along the way. Is whatever task or job I was given, even as an intern, as a work study student, I just try to focus on that and do it at a high level. And that's kind of helped me along the way.
And the only other piece I'll add to that is know your why you want to do this, right? Like, I think we're a unit that doesn't necessarily have a lot of metrics, right? Like, you can look at the academic side of the house and they got to hit certain marks. But knowing why you want to be in student athlete development is going to help your overall growth. Because if you're saying I want to jump into student athlete development because it gives me more access and direct contact with students, that's not a good enough answer for me. If it is, as Amanda said, to help them grow holistically, then that's a better answer to me. Like, I don't want to ever have somebody jump into this work because it's the cool thing to do, it's the latest fad, it's right. Like, you got to jump into this knowing that you may work a lot of hours, but you also are helping students fulfill, and in the words of Timothy Bryson, who just joined, like, what your purpose is. And we're supposed to help you find that, when for so long, a lot of our students have been told, well, you're a great athlete, well, what else are you, right? And so that's what we're here to do. And if you're willing to do that, come join us.
I love it. I love it. We have got 1 minute to spare, and I'm going to use that, just as Amanda did at the beginning, to express my gratitude to each of you on our panel of goats for joining us today. The chat is blowing up right now with additional gratitude from the guests. We have loved having you, loved hearing from you. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for sharing your insights and knowledge with us today.
Thank you, Game Plan, for bringing this all together.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Taylor and Worth.
You bet. Thanks all. We'll see you next time.